Did you hear the depressing news this week that the Sunshine Coast and Wide Bay region has the worst unemployment in regional Australia? Maybe that's one of the reasons so many locals take a shot at small business. But with the success rate crushingly low, a crystal ball would sure come in handy. I don't have one, but perhaps the next best thing coming up in just a moment, a futurist. And maybe you only found out that the Sunshine Coast had an American football team this year, but gridiron has been alive and strong in our region for some years now. How strong? You'll find out in the next half hour when our fearless producer, Daniel Prosser, catches up with the Spartans. So how is business? If you're on your own or if you're thinking about an entrepreneurial venture, a peek into the future would be a big help, right? I've brought someone who can give you just that. Sohail Inayatullah isn't a soothsayer, but he is an expert futurist, and I caught up with him this week to find out about big future trends and how you can do your own foresight planning. Let's start with 3D printing, which has really been taking off in the last few years. I asked Sohail where he sees that expanding.
It's one of those, if it emerges in the current trajectory, it's quite disruptive. So if you go further out, does your home become a 3D printed kitchen? Or if you're in the brick business, what happens to bricks? Do you still make them the old-fashioned way, or are they 3D printed? So
are there a lot of construction projects looking into this large-scale 3D printing model?
With most organizations, most corporations, they're usually caught off guard. They're mostly reactive because generally you're good at something you're doing, so we keep on doing it. The new technologies come in and the CEO is too busy with day-to-day affairs. Research department is still trying to finesse last year's project. So most often they're caught by surprise, and the normal reaction is head of the sand or fight the new technology, regulate, etc.
And we see that so much. We spend all of our working hours just maintaining the status quo. And then if we find something that works, we tend to sort of ride it for as long as we can, by which time you become engulfed in the future.
Yeah, the real challenge is with the pace of technology continue to accelerate, how do I find slow time to make sure that the new technologies reduce our workload? So it's really finding a wiser way to play with time.
How do we do that? How do we get on top of it?
Well, in some areas, if we know that kids being born will go through 10 to 15 careers, if we know that 40% of the jobs we have today in the manufacturing area as well as in services will be automated in 10, 15 years, then you have to start to think of how do you think about the future of work and training. So clearly it's not just enough to forecast, but to think how do we embed our kids today with flexibility, scenario thinking, and how do we ensure if we are going towards an automated future that people have purpose and a certain type of income is guaranteed so we can play in other areas.
Can we break down that automated future a little bit more? So these figures, the projections, how do they come about?
Well, people are looking at the rate of the new technologies. They're looking at the rate of how current jobs are being automated. And they're looking at the possibilities if we continue with artificial intelligence. Are the things I'm doing today, can they be done in a swifter, more efficient way?
It's interesting. There's news bots now who can write the news. I don't even have to do it.
Someone had this quote was saying that if you're afraid your job should be automated, it probably should be.
Wow. Okay, that's a good one to keep in mind. Yeah. Okay, top tip number one.
But then the issue is, okay, if it can be automated, what's the value I provide
as a human being?
As a human being, and also to the market, what can I do that's different?
So rather than rallying against the change, looking to it and saying, okay, from my perspective, what possibly could be automated, let's work towards enhancing the more human qualities that I bring to this and allowing that automation to sort of come in good time and be ready for it.
Yeah, so if you're teaching, it's better that you don't lecture anymore, right? That the kids get online, or the PhD students get online, find information they need, then you meet with them and listen and develop converse with them and do questioning.
You know, I want to pick you up on this because it's definitely something that all of the universities are talking about and moving towards, but we're finding that students aren't actually listening to those lectures. They don't have that initiative to drive it. So then how do we sort of build initiative?
It's almost not just what you say, but how you put it together. So you can have an AI news aggregator, but that's not the value. The value is the way you sort out the news. Say, here's what's important. Here's how it links to 10, 15, 20 years ago, to 100 years ago. That's the kind of value added.
Because how can a computer really understand the enormous complexity of culture and place?
Yes. So the initial lecture can do that, and then there's the online work. But there's a whole kind of, if you look at e-facilitation, that's also skill set. It's not just saying, okay, aloha, goodbye, call me in 6 months. There's ways to keep interaction, but then when you get them together, it's really that questioning part, that face-to-face, how do we learn about learning? So it's this back and forth, again, using face-to-face wisely, using technologies wisely, and actually exploring in these new areas, which is very different from saying these new technologies are scary, I won't use them, I don't know what to do.
Yeah, let's have a look back at Kodak, because that's a really interesting case study of a company that really defied change, but as a consequence has fallen away into nothingness compared with the companies that brought out digital photography. So your Nikons and Canons. Poor Kodak's still sitting there holding on to this very first digital camera that was actually built by a Kodak employee, holding on to it, hoping that it would never get out because they wanted to keep selling film.
That's in terms of what we try to, when we work with organizations or cities or countries, the first thing I ask them is, what is your use future? What are you doing today that you continue to do that no longer fits how the world is changing or your preferred vision? And that sets the process. What are we doing that's used that actually doesn't take us to where we wish to go? And that's often, once they can figure that out, that allows them to think about what the alternatives are.
Well, figuring it out's the hard part, though, isn't it? Really?
Well, that's true, but almost every organization, everyone on the ground knows what are we doing today that doesn't make sense, but we're just doing it because we always did it. And that kind of disruption allows new ideas to emerge, new scenarios to emerge.
And if we have a chance to think about the future, most of us think about things like climate change, overpopulation, terrorism. Those are factors affecting the whole world that most businesses are in some way going to be impacted by.
And it's getting clear. For example, one view towards climate change, you go into a politics of fear. The second is, okay, we're going to have sea level rise. We're going to have these implications. How do we innovate around that? If seas are going to rise, who designs the infrastructure? Who designs the knowledgeware to make sure humans are protected? So someone has to do that. So that's kind of, here's the future, let's use it smartly, as opposed to strange debate that's not happening or is it happening, etc.
Overpopulation is going to create some huge challenges for the health industry and aged care industries. Can you see some kind of innovative business models coming out of that challenge? For
me, overpopulation, I would prefer to disaggregate that a bit. So in some areas of the world, there's massive depopulation. If you look Spain, France, much of Europe, every generation there'll be fewer people. I think there's 6 million homes right now in Europe where there's no one there because people have aged and died off. There's empty homes. So there's massive depopulation going on in parts of the world. In other parts of the world, for example, in the MENA region, Middle East and North Africa, there's a youth boom for the next 10, 15 years, massive amount of young males. And if you go to 2050, 40% of the young people in the world will be from Africa. So then in terms of if you're in Australia, you're thinking, okay, what does that mean for me? If there's depopulation, well, that's obvious what that means. If there's a youth bulge, then how do you make sure they have training, education? How do you work with that group? How do you inspire them? Other areas are aging. So if you're in the aging industry, then you think about, okay, we know as people get older, they fall more. So the design is, how do I design smart homes or hospitals where the floors are sensing? So real-time information to my nurse, my doctor, my carer, etc. So it's then designing around that possibility. So that's a way to actually find out if that future is occurring, what's my role in it, how do I innovate there.
You're on ABC Sunshine Coast with Ursula. I'm speaking with futurist Sohail Inayatullah. Your new book, What Works? Case Studies in the Practice of Foresight. What does it offer readers?
Well, there's two parts. One is really, if you're going to do futures, if you're going to look at foresight, what actually works. So it's kind of a whole range of case studies, work we've been doing international policings with Europol, AFP, work we've been doing with schools, with libraries, with biosecurity. So in different areas, here's experiments, here's what works. So it's not the theory. If you engage in foresight, what practically works, what leads to more effective outcomes. So there's a whole range of case studies on that.
I'm interested in the libraries because they have changed a lot in the last decade out of necessity, and some libraries have been really quite innovative. What have you seen in terms of the best innovation from libraries?
I've been working on foresight in libraries for the last 10 years. And I think when we did one library project, again, the first thing is, what are we doing today that doesn't work? Then you start to think, what are the alternatives? So alternative one is going out 10, 15 years where every person walks in and they get this Oculus Rift. They get a virtual reality tour of information. So they put on the goggles or the headset, so they see the virtual library, whether it's Shakespeare, someone speaks to them and guides them. So there's going to be a whole revolution in designing that software, creating those spaces. Number two is, as we move to the e-world, what can libraries do that's needed? And of course, one of them is the heart of the community. Where can people connect and learn and share? So libraries become the center of the changing community. Classes on aging, classes on finances. If we know that women live longer than men, classes on finances for the widowed, or internet speed dating at libraries. You name it. It becomes a place that's connected. So those are two possibilities. The third is libraries get older and quieter than ever. They just disappear. So the main thing is to think of, well, how can we change? So I know Brisbane Library was looking at, okay, let's ensure that there's 3D printers everywhere. They're costly for one person, but we can provide the space. So kids walk in, they design the product, they design a dinosaur, then they click 3D print and they get something they can play with. So and the real shift is libraries as keepers of information to libraries as creators of information.
Yes.
So they're no longer passive, they're active. And so the best librarians throughout this country or museums are actually saying, how do I use the wisdom of the crowds? How do I co-curate the library for a different future? And we're seeing that. Now the hard part is many librarians are keepers of the collection.
Mm-hmm.
So they've been collecting and keeping the collection, but as you mentioned earlier, Google AI can do that much better. So can librarians go from keepers of the collection to innovator in the gardens? The gardens being Oculus Rift, 3D printing, heart of the community. So one group of students, they said, well, actually the old library was the fort. And now we need to have the new library as the metaphor of the fire that keeps on spreading, the knowledge that keeps on spreading. So if you're a new librarian, how do you do that? Your KPI changes. It's not number of books loaned, it's people influenced, people have entered your library space.
And you've said it a few times, to start with the question of what is not working here. The challenge is actually identifying and accepting what isn't working right now.
Yeah, that's the first step. What are we doing today that doesn't fit our vision? You may still like it, or you may still dislike it.
How do you get past that?
I mean, what I try to do is ask people, does the metaphor serve me? So this is not a value judgment space. We don't like your future, or we like your future. We don't like your present. It's saying, is the way you're doing things serving you in the way you're going? So it's just a very neutral question. So someone can be angry, full of fear, etc. The question is, okay, is that serving you in terms of your direction? If it is, fine, stay in that space. You've suggested as Kodak, well, that may not be the best place to be. Do you wish to be Kodak? Some people do, yeah, good, enough of this. I can't handle it anymore. Some people are, well, no, really,
it's this way or die.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
Some people say, well, I want to innovate, I want to create new spaces. Then foresight can help identify alternative futures and then develop metaphors that can support those stories.
I have to bring up something here, though. There's definitely been a shift to a lot of the things of the past. One of the other people I'm speaking with today is Rhonda Hetzel, and she's developed a huge following of people who are going back to basics. You know, looking after the home, knowing how to sew, how to make your own soaps, how to keep your own garden, things like that. So on the one hand, we've got all this future pushing us forward. On the other hand, there is also a trend of going back to basics.
The good thing about her suggestion, it slows time down.
Mm-hmm.
Heartbeat slows down, everything slows down, you feel more control of the future, which is fantastic. Now, the other part I would add, if you're going local economy, make sure your thinking is global, that you're still a planetary citizen, not trying to create a little fortress around your home. So you can slow down your economy, slow down localization, not be influenced by external factors, but make sure your thinking is also, I'm on this planet. So that's the global local. So that scenario makes quite a bit of sense. Others prefer, well, no, let me get on this fast lane and kind of move very quickly through the new technologies and find myself playing a smart role in those.
Well, we're talking about slowing time. Meditation and mindfulness is something that's really picked up in the last year, particularly on the Sunshine Coast. Where are the opportunities in that area?
Well, one, if you're designing a hospital, we know hospital resource use drops almost 42% if the people you're seeing are doing some type of meditation, relaxation process. So clearly, if you're a tough financial accountant, the first thing you should recommend everyone in your corporation is meditate.
Nice,
You know?
yep.
So that's what the CFO should be doing, who's in charge of efficiency. So how do I create more value? You create healthier people. So clearly in the health industry, we would expecting the Ministry of Health to be focusing on this. In education, we know students who have quiet time, 20, 30 minutes, they're more productive, they're happier, there's less bullying. So those are the two ministries that need to be innovating in doing things like meditation, mindfulness, relaxation. Insurance companies in the U.S., for example, there's one, your insurance is reduced if after a bad health outcome you follow a meditation program. So that's a third area. So corporations are understanding if we wish to play a different role in the future, we're going to save money by moving towards prevention.
Do you actually work with local businesses to help with this future planning?
Local businesses, I would say not so much. Most of my work, Tuesday I'm going to South Africa for 2 weeks working with the ministry there. A few weeks ago, it's usually different countries I go to. But I live in Malulaba, so this is home. Local businesses, what happens for them is because they're still always trying to make it, and the future is discounted. So they actually have to scale together to be able to think about the future.
What do you mean?
Well, if you're a small business, you're just meeting orders, you're seeing what's emerging, you're letting the market decide your future, right? And that makes sense. Why would you be thinking about the next technology? You can barely manage meeting orders today. But you have 6, 7 local businesses, then they can unite and think, okay, what should be our strategy towards disruptions? And then they together start to work on that. So it's almost like a cooperative approach, a council approach.
Thank you so